Adventure. This is episode 197 with Andrew Miles. The Art of Adventure is the podcast that helps you travel the world, run your business, and embark on an epic quest. I'm your host, lead explorer, and guide, Derek Loudermilk. If you go to derekloudermilk.com, you can check out the show notes for this episode with all the links and download your free guide to the top 10 ways to make money online while traveling the world. And if you want to learn how the adventure mindset, practicing courage, and nature can up-level your business, this is what you will get when you come to Adventure Quest in Bali, April 20 to 27, 2018. So if you are a high performer, but you feel like there's an entirely new level that you can get to and you can take your business to, this is the trip for you. So there's a page for Adventure Quest on derekloudermilk.com. Check it out and let's have a conversation. Now, I'm really excited about today's guest, Andrew Miles. He and I have become pretty good friends recently, and he's just such a fascinating guy. He is way ahead of his time in terms of bridging Eastern and Western medicine. He splits his time between China and the US, and he's a doctor of Chinese medicine. And he tells this amazing story where he went to China to source the very best herbs to make this new herbal product that he's bringing to the global market. And it's really a fascinating story how he went there and how he formulated this. And we're going to get into a lot of talk about superfoods and microbiome and Chinese herbs and things like acupuncture and how they affect gases within our body and gas transmitters. These are signaling molecules like neurotransmitters. We're going to talk about how moldy areas of the world are associated with magic. We're going to talk about the link between gut bacteria and spirituality. Interesting. And for high performers, what we can do to cultivate our body to maximize high performance. And the whole time, there'll be some fascinating comparisons between Chinese business philosophy and American business philosophy. So this is a super unique health-related adventure episode. I know you're going to get a ton out of it. Here is Andrew. Welcome back to the Art of Adventure, and my guest today is Andrew Miles. Welcome to the show, Andrew.
Thank you so much for having me.
And for the listener, Andrew is a doctor of Oriental Medicine. Currently, you have your home base in Albuquerque. You previously had a practice in Oregon. So we were introduced by Laden Juracek, who's been on my show a couple of times. We were talking about your show when he came to stay with me in Croatia, because he's really interested in brain implants, and we both have a science background. So we were nerding out about science podcasts, and he said, check out Botanical Biohacking. So I think I listened to the first 20 episodes all in a row or something like that. The acupuncture was very fascinating to me, and there's a lot of other ones that were very fascinating. So I'm excited to have you on the show, and I imagine this conversation will probably be all over the place. You just got back from a trip from China, and you were there to source herbal ingredients for a product that you've created. And I'm just curious, like, what that whole, what were you doing in China to get these ingredients?
Sure. Well, first of all, when we think of Chinese medicine in the West, people usually think of acupuncture. Acupuncture is utilized much, much more in the United States than it is in China when you're looking at a per capita basis.
Really?
Absolutely. The majority of Chinese medicine in China is herbs. It's the application of not just specific formulas that a doctor may give you, but herbs that are used in alcohols, herbs that are used as liniments, herbs that are, every block has a CVS-sized pharmacy just filled with different herbal products. And they have to meet certain quality criteria for safety and efficacy to be used there. And a big way that these are used are these herbal foot soaks. So a lot of problems that people have to do with peripheral circulation. A lot of, problems with cardiology. People with diabetic neuropathy, that's a huge one. People post chemo will have, problems with nerve pain in their feet. So at our clinic, we use these herbal foot soaks pretty extensively for people who have had chronic pain. Because once your hip starts hurting, you can't go jogging, and then your circulation gets trashed. So it's something that we leaned on a lot with our own practice and had a lot of success with. And there was an acupuncture, seminar, kind of continuing education going. And I just sent some as a gift to just, hey guys, check this out. And people had some really incredible results, talked about it, and they reported it, and we sold out overnight. And the demand was just voracious. So then we pre-sold a lot of them all over the world to clinics. So we have the podcast Botanical Biohacking, and I'm doing my best to bring both the tradition and science with that, but I don't at the end of it want to be like, oh, hey, buy my boner pills. You know what I mean? That's really tacky. So I've wanted to create the bridge and, provide this to different health practitioners so they can use their judgment. So, you know what I mean? There's a degree of credibility. Do you have boner pills? Yes, but yeah, but the way that those are utilized, sometimes people just need more sleep, for instance. I think jacking up hormones isn't always the safest route to go. But okay. Yeah, anyway, so the quality of herbs that we're using, we have friends in the Tibetan area of Sichuan. So it's an ethnically Tibetan area on the Tibetan plateau. And we were just sourcing it through friends and family, this kind of thing. But now we have this huge order. So we needed to go and get permission from, local chieftains, mayor, to even go up into that area. And after getting permission, which involved a lot of drinking, to be honest, and partying and doing some Tibetan dancing, that kind of thing, we went up there with a research team from 2 universities in China to test the soil quality, basically test every step of the way. And we filmed that process from the fields to the laboratories, so we can be sure that this is the highest quality. There's absolutely nothing that's adulterating it.
That's so cool. That's amazing.
It's been a dream.
How long were you there doing your filming and all the whole process?
So the first, Lan went first and was talking to her classmates on the academic side of things. So, that's her background. She has her PhD in herbal pharmacy. My background within Chinese society, yes, I studied there, but I also have a lot of contacts in the Chinese business world. And to get things done effectively, you need to have the blessing of the government, of other alternative governments in Chinese society. You need to make sure that you're good with everybody so that things can flow pretty effectively. It's not as simple as just ordering something on Amazon. If you're dealing with a country that is in the process of becoming a more law-based society, but maybe isn't quite there yet, you need to make sure that not only is everything legal, but everything is done appropriately.
And I think you're an American citizen. Are you also a Chinese citizen? Or what's your relationship with China sort of historically?
So I had a Chinese stepdad growing up. So I had a lot of, cultural influence from the time I was about 11 years old. And then we've been going back and forth to China for the past 8 years. So, we'll live there for a few years and live here for a couple of years. And it's necessary to maintain those contacts and friendships and really nurture life on both sides so that we can be an effective bridge between these two worlds.
How did you get those Chinese business contacts that you were talking about?
Well, it's a bit of a weird and slightly esoteric story if, your listeners are up for it.
It sounds right up our alley.
So I was living in China, and my Kung Fu teacher, who I've had since I was 15, said, hey, come to Taiwan. I've arranged with Hong Kong University. You're going to teach Kung Fu here. We'll pay you for it for the next month. And then, also teach the nurses. They have a nursing program. Teach them some basic Chinese medicine diagnostics. And, it'll be fun. I can teach you some more stuff. So I thought, okay, cool. Went and did that. And while he was there, he was saying, you haven't really been doing Qigong. I was like, okay, thanks, all the meditation and stuff. He's like, yeah, I've just been, basically you've just been doing everything in kind of an alpha state, and that's nice, but it's not really what it's about. Like, okay, thanks for telling me now. And he said the harmonization that's supposed to happen with these meditative practices is that when your hands are down, you should be in a delta, almost dreamlike state. And when your hands are up in the air, it should be in kind of a gamma theta kind of prayer type of state. And so it's not just moving your breath with the movements when you do Tai Chi. You should be tuning your brain like a radio. That's how he described it to me. He said, right now, most of the time you're just kind of in logic mode, and that's one radio station. And maybe you do meditation and you get a little bit into alpha, and then you're listening to two radio stations. But when you're working and living with this full spectrum, he said this is traditionally called opening the three eyes of, they call it the sanhuan, which means like the three aspects of the altruistic or ethereal soul. But basically he was like, look, basically what they were talking about is the effect of consciousness unencumbered by the seven emotions. So emotions cloud this kind of transitioning, just as, you're in a fight with your significant other, it's really hard to get into those different mental states. You kind of get stuck in one. So emotions screw with your ability to transition between radio signals. So I was working on this for a couple of hours a day for a month. Then I got back to Sichuan and things started clicking into place in such an insane way. So this is pre-Xi Jinping's corruption reforms. But within 2 weeks, I was becoming sworn brothers with the men who control Sichuan, which is an area the size of France and about the population of France. So I was at banquets with the head of the anti-corruption police and the head of the mafia, and these guys are drinking together. I'm doing shots with all of them. I got in really deep, and I'd meet people who were frankly quite evil, and I would just adjust my internal radio station to their frequency, and these guys would open up like babies, and they'd be hugging me, and I'd be like pinching their cheek, who's a good boy, and other people I'd be meeting, and it wasn't just me. A lot of these guys who I met were like, oh, okay, you leveled up and you got that. I didn't think foreigners could do that. I thought you guys were too stupid. Like, again, thanks. But some of these guys had a third grade education, but what they could do is they could run through the spectrum within themselves between, these very dark places within themselves and these very light places. And that was all part of who they were and how they were approaching the world. And they were working in teams and they could connect with each other easier. Sometimes you meet people and you think, oh, fuck this guy. I can't deal with him, right? They would adjust their internal radio station so that they could harmonize with people. And as long as somebody's intention was for the group, they would say, this is a good person. And, I would meet these kind of like drug dealing pimp type guys. And I would think, why don't we go hang out with this super Taoist guy instead? He was really cool, really nice guy wanting to help the world. Initially, I got scolded for that. And they were like, you don't get it. It's not just about heaven. It's about everything between heaven and earth. And that scumbag guy that you're looking down on, if he's looking out for the group first, even if he also has very base intentions, it can be something that's very beautiful. As heaven and earth come together, it's, sunshine and soil. That's where life happens. So he said, if you get a group of academics together who all have the best intentions in the world, look at how useless they are, because ultimately they won't be able to get anything done. Mm-hmm. And if you see a bunch of people who are, just kind of what we consider scumbags, and they're coalesced in a group and they don't have anybody who's maybe a little bit what we consider higher minded, they're not getting anywhere either. So ultimately it's this convergence of people with different intentions, different social backgrounds. And when this connection happens, then you can get such incredible and dramatic reach in society. You can, the 6 degrees of separation, it tends to happen pretty laterally based on your social class. But once you're bridging the social class gap by having people with these very different value systems working together, it can happen pretty dramatically. And that was what I was able to observe. And during that process as well, they were saying, you need to not be so selfish, because your game plan in life is, to have a clinic and, be a doctor and help people. And, that's cute, but you're not helping as many people as you could by stepping back, looking a little bigger and just looking at, okay, what is the most efficient way I can serve as many people as possible. And it may not be going through things the way I had planned. So,
whoa. So they challenged you to reconsider your plan. And is that what you've done?
It is. So before, what they were always asking me is, how many people are you feeding? How many employees do you have? How well are they taken care of? And so before I was thinking very, nuclear family, follow your bliss, a lot of stuff that came out of the 1950s. Mm-hmm. This is what I want to do with my wife and I. We're going to have a mom and pop store. We're going to do this to, clinic. We're going to do this to make ourselves happy and do good in the world. And basically their assessment was, you, by virtue of any advantage you've had in life, if you're not looking to feed other people, then you're sort of wasting space. So a lot of these guys came from the most humble backgrounds you can think of, like the Communist Party stepping on their neck literally as they're growing up as pig farmers because they were on the wrong side of the political spectrum. And by having the intention to take care of more of the group as a whole, it shifted their focus. So the way that shifted, the way that I'm approaching, being a catalyst and trying to bring this information from China, from the Eastern world into the Anglosphere, I guess, has widened. So I'm using the podcast. I'm helping to become a catalyst for other people to become specialists and really run with something. So instead of just looking at how can I further my career, I'm looking at nurturing the careers of many people, as well as hiring as many people as I can to make the best use of the resources that I, at least for this time, happen to have.
Oh, that's so cool. I love that. So you're thinking like the suppliers, for example, of the herbs for the foot bath, or, like, okay, these are people that I'm feeding. How do you think about that and keep track of who you're helping, and how do you know, I guess metrics or something like that?
I guess you never really do know, because sometimes you try to help someone and it ends up being a curse. But, when I meet people who say, okay, I have an intention to help people in this way. I'll give you an example. I have a friend, Eric Manstoff. He has right now a tea company called Enlightened Tea. And that was a company that originally we had started, and we were able to get high-grade herbs of this herbal formula called Xiaoyaosan, which takes the effects of stress away from the body. And he was working really hard on it with us, so I sold him the company and the direct sourcing for $1. And now that's his, and he's running with it, and he's doing a great job, and he's helping a lot of people. Ultimately, the resource that all of us have that is limited is human intention and the time we can put to anything. So if he's willing to put his intention toward that, then I definitely wanted to be a catalyst. So it helps him, it helps my friends in China, it helps the herb growers, it helps the environment as well, because in areas that are profitable for growing herbs, the government decides not to open coal mines in those areas. So it has an ecological benefit as well.
How do you think about your role as a bridge between Eastern and Western philosophies or medicine ideas, all kinds of things?
For me, since I was, 11, I'm kind of like two people. When I'm speaking Chinese, when I'm in that world, it's, I'm still me, but the way that I'm expressing myself, the thought patterns, the jokes I might make, there's a different personality involved, if that makes sense. And because of that, I'm able to get in deeper into Chinese society than I would be if I was just kind of like, hey, everybody, I'm an American, and I'm treated differently. So a sign that Chinese people accept you as one of them is they'll pull you aside and scold the hell out of you. And they won't do that with, oh, hey, foreign friend, everything you do is okay. And then secretly they think this guy's broken, So carrying that on into adulthood, into my 30s, where, a man in his 50s is saying, hey, this is where you're screwing up in life. And then saying, thank you so much for your advice. That's enabled me to maintain that bridge, because once I'm in the United States for 6 months to a year, basically when I'm here long enough that the actions of people isn't weird anymore, then I know that I'm slipping with something on the other side. And that's why I try to reconnect and maintain that. I'm not sure if that's a very indirect answer to your question, but I
Well,
guess
it's
that's how,
fascinating to have the awareness that like American thought patterns are pushing out Chinese thought patterns or whatever. I think terminology might be kind of important to talk about here. Is it thought patterns that we're talking about, or is it something else?
I would say it's a perspective as well. So there's a Chinese way of looking at the world and some fundamental assumptions. And just to give you an example, when I'm in the American world too much, I forget to pour other people's tea first. And I don't just mean that as table etiquette. I mean that as something deep that bleeds into all of life. The prevailing concept of a society that has been wealthy, now this has happened in Chinese society too, is in the past, following a cycle where there's extreme wealth, people tend to become more individual focused and tend to stop taking care of each other as well, which leads to social alienation and quite a bit of loneliness and depression. So there are stories in Chinese history of, some wealthy kid who is just depressed and morose all the time and is basically going completely goth, 500 years ago or something like this. So it's not an East and West thing so much as a economic cycle type of thing. But I notice that when I'm here more, I tend to get lured into the comforts of individualism. And it becomes easy for me to forget that I have a second cousin who could really use a bump every now and then, or a recommendation, or, just the level that people are interconnected in China is such that I'll get asked to do a favor to connect a friend of a friend's friend. And it may take 2 hours out of my day to do that. But at the same time, if I need anything like, I need to meet the CEO of this huge company because I have a friend in Europe who needs that hookup, it can happen within 24 hours. And I think that's something very useful that I would love to see more in the West. And it does happen within certain circles of people. And it's usually people who have done some work on themselves to do that self-cultivation to where they can really be conductors for others.
So you just said conductors, and, and we were talking about my book Superconductors, which is coming out next year, and the relationship building side of things. And I sort of approach building relationships strategically, have relationships in place before I ever need them. So if something comes along, now that I have a kid, I have a parenting question. Okay, there's a few parenting experts and doctors in my network that I can ask right away. It seems like almost just the general way of living in China has people thinking, that they have access to many more people than are just in their inner circle, which I think that sounds amazing, because a lot of people that I encounter, I think very, very much within their own age, neighborhood, demographic area, and don't consider the broader degrees of separation potential.
Economically, it makes sense initially. You're not friends with a hobo because probably somebody who's homeless or drifting will need more from you than you could possibly gain back from the other person. So there are some economics to it that I wouldn't say are evil or, judging that situation. But I think if the person has, a concept of reciprocity, a concept of working for the larger group, I think it can be a very different story in that case.
I've only spent 24 hours in China, so it's fascinating to me. I mean, anytime you go to a new country, there's all kinds of things that you can learn. But this is really, really intriguing. When I was in China, we went to Guangzhou and the tea market of the south. We were on a layover and we spent half of our day just tea shopping. Which is a really cool experience. Got a lot of pu'er tea, milk oolong tea, some green and white tea. I really, really enjoy, the tea ceremony experience and tasting it and all that. Do you drink much tea? And I'm curious, I want to ask you a little bit more about pu'er tea if you are tea knowledgeable.
Well, I know a little bit about tea, I'll say that. There are people who take it quite seriously. But yeah, pu'er is interesting because it's a fermented tea, and most of the fermented teas are very regulatory on gut microbiota. I think there was a study from Singapore on pu'er tea being better for reducing blood lipids, whereas oolong tea was better for more subcutaneous, the fat that's under your skin. And different green teas that aren't as fermented, don't have that kind of dramatic effect on gut flora or for weight loss. It's often marketed that way, but realistically, it doesn't really fly. And then there are Tibetan teas, which were the first that were actually fermented before 500 years before pu'er tea was a thing. They were inspired by the Tibetan teas, which were fermented because it took so long on the donkeys or whatever they were using as pack animals to get up there from the herb growing areas, the altitudes that are more suitable for growing tea, up to the highlands. By the time it got up there, it was fermented. So that was kind of what kicked it off a few thousand years ago.
And so these pu'er tea cakes, they ferment them, and then they're dry. And so it's like whatever the byproducts of the fermentation, the organic compounds and things like that, are just sort of infused in the tea. So you're just getting a very broad spectrum of all kinds of different compounds when you make the tea. Is that what's happening?
Yeah, and interestingly, I was just speaking with a professor of pharmacology at Chengdu University, and she was saying that they've actually found in some of the more aged pu'er teas, the ones that are 5 to 10 years old, the ones that are highly prized, they're cultivating toxic bacteria on them. And now that's not to say that it's bad, because many toxic bacteria in the right dose are quite useful. So it's kind of going back to the idea of you have that one scumbag in your group just in case, right? Yeah. There are like strep in the gut. We all have strep. Most of us have strep. If it takes over, you get strep throat. But in the gut, it can create hyaluronic acid, which we need for joint health. So here's this vilified organism, and yet when it's in the right situation, it's actually quite beneficial. So that's what her hypothesis is at this time, is that, okay, there's this toxic bacteria growing, but it's also really, really prized for health. So what is going on in there? That's her question. What's going on in the gut, which is so difficult to measure at this point, that will make it so highly prized for settling the gut? Is it that it's that one pathogenic bacteria is fighting with some of the other pathogenic bacteria? Could be, much in the same way as Vikings were, hired by the French to set up Normandy way back in the day, one pirate to fight the others. So it's kind of this idea, you're using one mercenary group to fight the other. So anyway, that's just kind of on the cutting edge of pu'er research. So I thought that would be...
Oh, cool. I love it.
Yeah.
And so back to terminology, when I drink pu'er tea, and especially if I'm adding coconut oil to it, it's almost stronger than coffee in terms of the energy or the fire that I feel. But I don't really think those are sufficient. Like saying I have energy from coffee or tea, or I feel fire in my belly, to talk about the benefits of superfoods or herbal supplements or all these things. Can you give me any better ways to talk about effects or experiences, the benefits from these things?
Well, there's a perspective I can offer, and that is, it's not just the superfood that we're having, it's the effect that it has on the bacteria, and the bacteria have an effect on the gases in the body. So one of the blessings of looking deep at herbal pharmacology is we're able to look at herbs that are traditionally said to boost up qi. Now, qi is traditionally in the West translated as energy. There's one problem with that. When you're in a taxi in China and they go to gas up, they go to the gas station, there's a big sign that says qi on it, because qi literally means gas. So it has connotations of energy, but the literal term is gas. And just as, when you look at physics, there's energetic connotations to gas. Gas particles are always in a state of motion, this kind of thing. So these bacteria and the way that you're cultivating them can create these gases, and these gases can be very thermogenic. So if we look at Wim Hof breathing, how is it affecting this thermogenesis in the body? One of these gases that your gut can create, as well as endothelium and tissue in your body, is nitric oxide, and it's also created when nerves fire. So nitric oxide, in the right amounts, can convert fat into heat. So this warmth that you may feel during meditation by cultivating certain foods and having the right exercise and relaxation will allow the free flow of these gases and really fine-tune the cellular distribution. And what that's doing is increasing intracellular communication. Traditionally, we may call that bumping up consciousness. And at the same time, it's cultivating this very real heat that's traveling through the body that's causing this vasodilative effect, opening up the blood vessels and increasing circulation.
Wow. I want to know more about gases. And it sounds like you're saying communication or signaling gases. So I'm used to thinking of like neurotransmitters as main signaling molecules, or
it is that
hormones. Yeah. But so gas is that as well.
Yeah. So the term is called gasotransmitter. And they're gases that carry messages. So there are signaling gases that will carry messages from nerves to cell and cells to cell. But it's kind of like accidental, or sort of like a catalyst effect. What gasotransmitters do is they have these very direct regulatory effects. So the nerve will fire and electricity goes to another nerve. But also this gas is released and it can cross membranes in the body and communicate directly with cells. This was first discovered in the 1990s, or early 90s. And since then, they found that these gases have regulatory effects on hormones. And some of these gases really fascinating. Like there's this gas traditionally called kidney qi, which is associated with water. And if you look in Taoist alchemy, it's specifically the fire within water. And in hydrothermal vents at the bottom of the ocean, they're kicking out hydrogen sulfide, which some of these microorganisms are living on. You have these ecosystems in these hydrothermal vents that even, you go up the food chain and you have these blue crabs down there. Mm-hmm. So,
that's what I studied when I was
right. Yeah. The virus in Yellowstone, is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. We were largely in boiling acid systems in the park, but very similar to thermal vent systems.
Mm-hmm. So this gas was traditionally said to increase longevity. So if you cultivate a lot of this type of kidney qi, then it's said that you become an immortal. So what does that mean? If everybody's dropping dead at 50, you probably live to 80, something like this, right? People exaggerate and say, oh, so-and-so lived to 900 or whatever. I don't believe that. But interestingly, this gas triggers a gene called klotho. And when they block that gene in mice, the mice will live 1/3 as long as their buddies who don't have that gene expression flipped on or off. So by cultivating this hydrogen sulfide, which is in the body, it's this kind of sulfur egg fart smell. So having that going on in the intestines at the right ratio can be this gas and bacterial relationship that it's literally self-cultivation. And the Taoists called that cultivation, but you're literally cultivating this internal ecosystem that can serve as a catalyst for energy. So it's not itself an energy source necessarily, although it can sort of serve when oxygen is low. So if you are having a stroke and you don't have enough oxygen, these gasotransmitters will kind of stand in as temp workers for oxygen. When turtles are hibernating on the bottom of a river, right, in the silt, they're making use of nitric oxide and hydrogen sulfide to stay alive through the winter. This is a key part of how animals hibernate, how deep sea diving works with whales and other cetaceans. This is just part of our natural physiology. And this is what meditative traditions, Qigong traditions have been making use of. So I get excited about this because this is a way for me to take some of these experiences that I had as a kid that were, I thought were pretty weird compared to, maybe what was mainstream. And now being able to really bring that in a tangible way down to earth also means that we don't have to take the word of the ancestors as, like, well, so-and-so said it's this way, so it must be true. it also means potentially we can test this stuff and further develop it and really expand our human potential.
Wow. Yeah. But the first question that comes up is, there is a lot of traditional activities, medical or otherwise, that sort of, there's a lot of tradition and practice, but the mechanisms aren't necessarily understood, spiritual practices or whatever. How do you think about trying to understand as yet unexplained medical or spiritual practices?
Well, I, of course, would be a fool to have definitive answers, but I do have questions based on information that we've already found. So one is that the areas in China that are known for having a lot of sort of witch activity, right? People, or associated with magic, or if we look at the Black Forest in Germany, there are a lot of these areas that are pretty moldy when you get right down to it. Areas in India that are, they're just full of fungi. And we know that we can trip out by ingesting certain fungi. And we also know that these fungi are airborne. And there are gases in the environment, swamp gases that burp up. These gases I was just talking about that serve as gasotransmitters, if you get way too much nitric oxide, you trip out. Hydrogen sulfide, the same thing. It can cause asthma. It can cause breakdown of tissue. It causes too much oxidative damage on the nerves. It causes people to trip out pretty severely. So that's one perspective. It's possible that some of these spiritual experiences have overlap with different gut bacteria, different gases, and that's not to diminish it, because it's also possible that in doing so, in increasing the intracellular communication, it could be opening up aspects of consciousness that allow us to tap into these other radio stations that are part of our consciousness, but maybe blocked for whatever reason. We're just not tuned into it. So that's why I'm so interested in the potential of gasotransmitter research, because I think that could really potentially start to draw some of these connections together. How those interact with biophotons. Are they non-local? How does that, there are theories on microtubules and intracellular consciousness, and I don't know. I think it's just interesting. I think those are the areas that, once they're connected, may provide some answers.
We're getting into the realm past what I know anything about at this point.
Yeah, well, me too. I'm just throwing it out there. But
can you tell me about the acupuncture and gasotransmitters? How are they connected, if they are?
Yeah, so I'm an acupuncturist. Sometimes I like to think I'm a pretty good one. I've been at it since I was a kid. I also will say that acupuncture is not the only way to go about doing what acupuncture is supposed to do. So there was a study a few years back, and they measured for the acupuncture points using a machine to determine electrical conductivity. And the Chinese researchers said, this literally means gas. I wonder if there are some gases, there's some gaseous activity going on these acupuncture points. And what they discovered was, compared to other points on the skin, nitric oxide was leaking out of the acupuncture points at 3 times the levels. So 3 times the amount of nitric oxide is leaking out. So I think of it almost like a thermal vent. You see kind of volcanic areas, you'll see steam coming out of grates and, on the side of the road, this kind of thing. So that's kind of how I think of it. And when you get too much nitric oxide bunched up, it causes sort of a traffic jam, and the cells stop communicating with each other. If it'll shut down the ability for cells to create ATP. It'll also begin doing oxidative damage, and that's associated with pain signaling. So when you insert the acupuncture needle, there are many effects that are going on, but what I see as kind of the central effect that ties them all together is that it will release more of this gas. And in releasing some of this gas, it's like creating more exit ramps on a freeway when you have a traffic jam. It's going to allow the overall flow to improve. And once that flow is in its sweet spot, then pain goes down and healing goes up. So I also think that when you look at some of these old-timey medieval practices like bloodletting, I believe that the benefits there potentially are that if you're releasing a little bit of blood, you're also releasing a lot of these gases because blood carries gases, and it's one of the main pathways for nitric oxide in the body. So basically, you're just trying to even out the flow, not getting too much, not getting too little. And that's one of the roles of acupuncture and cupping or scraping therapy or qigong. So my take on it is if these gases are doing what they're supposed to be doing, then there's really not a great reason to be using acupuncture.
Okay, cool. So that would mean that you're not doing preventative acupuncture, but only when the gases are out of optimal use are you going in?
Well, what I'll say is this. If the gases are built up too high, people will naturally start to sigh. And if that's happening, you just sigh a little more. If you find that you're exhausted and yawning a little more, then you do a breathing exercise as though you're yawning more. If you need more blood circulation, you can use an herbal foot bath or go for a jog or stand on your head. So my take is I'm not married to the tool. I think when people are focused too much on a certain tool or a certain practice that they're doing, it's like viewing the world with a hammer. Everything looks like a nail. And I think ultimately that can be really misleading. My take is, and this comes back to kind of the Taoist medical approach, is you look at the underlying pathology and then you look at the strategy. And as long as it fits the strategy, there are 10,000 tools that'll do the trick. So, people will say, oh, what about, whatever they may be up to? Yeah, sure. Who cares? As long as it's following that underlying strategy, you're good to go.
Cool. Oh, I like this. Let's see. Recently, I've been thinking more about mitochondria because of Dave Asprey's Bulletproof podcast. And mitochondria are theoretically ancient microbes that are now, living within our cells. And so there's the mitochondria, and then there's the microbiome, the bacteria in our gut and on our skin and stuff like that. Are there similarities between thinking how we can cultivate the microbiome and what we should think about with mitochondria?
Yes. In a word, yes, because one of the keys with mitochondria is you need the sweet spot of inflammation. And inflammation has a lot of overlap with heat. I mean, if you're overheated, you tend to get into an inflammatory state. And one of the aspects of gut microbiota is that it can create, like a compost pile will get hot from the microbial activity.
Yeah.
If you have too little of that going on in the body, then you can't raise your body temperature. Some people always feel cold, this kind of thing. And when that happens, you don't get that inflammatory response that's necessary for the healing process to happen. So recently what's been found, it's getting to the point where the immune system is almost a misnomer because it's really the telecommunication system. Macrophages, which we're seen to just kind of be like Pac-Man and eat away dead debris, they're finding these guys are also building stuff after they've eaten it away. The immune system is functioning quite a bit as a telecommunication system. So in this way, the relationship between gut microbiota, the immune function, and the mitochondria are really inseparable.
When I'm working with entrepreneurs or people that want to be performing at a high level with a lot of focus and energy expenditure throughout the day, they're maximizing their sleep and their diet and eating superfoods and thinking positive thoughts and all these types of things. What are there particular herbs and particular practices that you recommend for people that, really focus on high performance?
Yes. What I would say the first and most dangerous aspect of hard work and intellectual brilliance is that you have all of these neurons firing in the brain pretty constantly. And this creates an inflammatory state that needs to cool down. As you mentioned, sleep, that's going to be the number one way for that to happen. And sometimes when life starts hitting and you start winning pretty hard, it becomes very difficult to get that sleep because especially in cases where you're doing international business, you may have to be up at odd hours of the day or you're flying somewhere and, unless you're flying on a private jet with a bed, you're not going to be sleeping as well as you may be. So most important will be to cool down that inflammation that's going on in the brain. A formula that I like to use when I'm just really busy. It's a very common formula. Of course, talk to your doctor, make sure it's right for you. Disclaimer, but it's called sheng mai. And what it is it's 3 herbs. It's beautifully elegant. And the first herb is ginseng, which a lot of people know and love. It's an adaptogen. Ginseng by itself is pretty outdated. And the reason for this is because the amount of time that ginseng stays in your bloodstream is pretty low. It's just a few hours. But when you add 2 other herbs to it, one is called maidong, which is thins the blood slightly, and it's very good for digestion. And then the other herb is the schisandra berry called wuweizi. And this herb, interestingly, it binds with the ginsenosides, and it keeps them in the system twice as long. So it's going to increase the bioavailability. So if I'm in startup mode and I need to be working 12-hour days without skipping a beat, I'll basically just make a tea out of this stuff and keep drinking it. For me personally, it also tends to drop my appetite, and I make use of my fat stores. It really starts to convert that fat into heat. Ginseng increases nitric oxide, and the other herbs help to keep that in check, so it's not going overly inflammatory. So that's a formula that I find to be pretty useful when you're in those just extreme work states where you need to be very high performance and don't quite have the time to sleep. Now, when you're in that state for a long time, what I find, what many people find, is then being able to comfortably gear down and get to sleep becomes a bit of a challenge. Mm-hmm. People may lay down and their mind is just racing and it won't shut off. And at that point, you need a sweet spot of inflammation to get into sleep. But when you get into a state where there's too much inflammation, you need to be able to gear that down with antioxidant activity in the body. Taking an Oregon grapeseed, it may have antioxidants, but ultimately you need your body's own expression of these endogenous antioxidants to really cool down the body. So, to ballpark that, if you combine something in the body that is naturally, if you take a plant-based substance that is naturally bitter and sour, more likely than not, it will be high in antioxidants. So rather than worrying about which super product to take in those cases, generally ballparking towards something that's going to be bitter and sour is probably going to set you on the right track.
And those 3 herbs, for example, what would be the process in America for having someone? Could you buy this somewhere, or should you go to a doctor of Chinese medicine to get this herb mix?
Sure. Well, first I'll just give some cultural background. In East Asia, this is an over-the-counter substance that anybody can get. It's not protected at all. In the U.S., all herbs are food. However, responsibly, it's good to say, hey, check with your doctor, Chinese medicine doctor. Make sure that the diagnosis is right before you take it. Having said that, it is a fairly straightforward and simple and relatively safe formula. There are entire books written about it.
Cool. I think there's probably a ton. I feel like I could just keep asking questions, but I think this is probably a pretty good first bite. I'd love to have you back on the show, first of all. Mm-hmm. But I just want to give you the opportunity, if there's anything that we haven't touched on today, or parts of our conversations that we didn't get to that you think are important for the listener to know, open it up for you to weigh in on that.
Well, one thing I'll say that I've learned the hard way, we took kind of a working vacation as we went to this Tibetan area. For the past 7 years, we've been working 12 to 17-hour days every day. And wow. It's been a huge mistake, to be perfectly honest. When you're in a state of, now I make use of that. I adapt to it by meditating every day and, gearing myself down, trying to stay in a state of flow and balance and all of that. But there's something about taking a trip to a completely different area and getting a different perspective and being in a different rhythm and stepping back completely from what you're doing and doing something that may appear to be useless. Having 20% of that in your life, I'm finding that can be incredibly good for the creative process. And, I'm really interested, I guess, as maybe a next trip to check out, Indonesia, kind of by Bali, that kind of area, because there's just so much, it's been such a cultural crossroads, and there's quite a bit of, wisdom and knowledge that I believe is hanging out there that I'd really love to tap into.
All right. Well, maybe meet up in Bali is in our future. We're planning on heading there next year as well. So.
Oh, awesome. Are there, I'm assuming, traditional doctors and healers down there, that kind of thing?
I don't know much about the various. See, there's lots of, priestesses and healers that will do various things for you that I didn't really take advantage of in Bali, at least. And then, broader Indonesia is so diverse. It's just, 10,000 islands, of each one is different.
Right.
But yeah, obviously, traditionally, they have very strong traditions that would be very interesting to learn more about.
I love looking at Ice Age maps and then checking out Indonesia because it's one giant landmass. And, if anybody has knowledge bases left over from that time, it would be people in that neck of the woods. So that's why it's always intrigued me is, Chinese culture, of course, is very deep and very old, and you get this just incredible deep knowledge base. And I've just been very curious about that neck of the woods and what that perspective has to offer all of us.
Yeah, it's so much to explore. Andrew, I want to acknowledge you for all the work you're doing for being a bridge between cultures and thinking in ways how you can feed people and looking out for the group and just having this broad understanding of scientific and traditional concepts. It's very impressive, and I'm really excited that you are in the position that you're in. Gives me a lot of excitement and hope. So,
well, thank you. Yeah. It beats homelessness, right?
And what's the best place for people to find you online?
Botanical Biohacking is our podcast. We also have a Facebook page. We'll be putting different videos up. But yeah, Botanical Biohacking. That's where we're hoping to be filtering a lot of the content through. And we're working with people in China as well to just keep it coming because there's a lot of perspective that I would just really love to share with the world.
Brilliant. Very exciting. Thanks so much for coming on the show today, Andrew.
Thank you.
Talk soon.
Okay. Talk to you then.
Wow, that was awesome. Amazing episode from Andrew Miles. You haven't heard the last of Andrew. I'm working on a trip with Andrew to China, to the herb regions in Sichuan, and maybe we'd be opening an Adventure Quest trip there in China. So if this was an interesting episode for you, stay tuned for that development. I'll be meeting up with him in China sometime in 2018. And if you've been thinking about Adventure Quest for a while, if you've heard about the last trips and how awesome they were, then maybe you should come on this one to Bali, April 20 to 27. It's going to be super rad. I'm really excited. Working on the menu right now. We've got this amazing private villa, and all the activities are super, super hot. And by that, I mean cool. Hot and cool. So go to DerekLaudermilk.com/AdventureQuest to check it out. Thanks for listening. Now it's your turn to go out there and be adventurous.